starten. Und es geht weiter mit jemandem, der auch in seinen Folien sogar mit vorgestellt wurde. Und es geht um David Legates. Er war früherer Klimatologe des US-Bundesstaates Delaware und er wird uns heute seinen Vortrag zeigen über die Probleme bei der Messung der Lufttemperatur und Niederschlag für die Bewertung des Klimawandels. Also einen herzlichen Applaus für Herrn Legates.
Well, thank you very much. Before I start, let me thank EIKE for inviting me, for inviting all of you. I've gotten to meet several people that I've only known from the research literature by name, and several of you I didn't know before are now my friends, so thank you to all of you for coming, and thank you for inviting me. I do have a problem. The problem is that yesterday, Dr. Connolly gave half of my talk. So I had an option. One of the things I could do is just be repetitively redundant and say the same thing over again, or what I could do is change my talk slightly. And so what I'm planning to do now is, if I can do it correctly, is to change the title. This is the old slides. And while I'm at it, I will apologize to the translators because they don't know now what I'm about to say, but that's good because that makes two of us because I don't know what I'm about to say either. By the way, can we all thank the translators for working on this? I didn't realize how important they were till I was in the Soviet Union once, and so I think they do an excellent job, and so because I've been listening to stuff in English, and so it works very good. Okay, so here we go. As you can see, I'm going to change the title. I'm going to get rid of the and temperature, air temperature, because that was already covered. I'm going to do a lot of precipitation. I was asking to see if Dr. Connolly's in the room. He isn't. But what I'm going to say is, essentially, I want to take issue with something that happened in his talk. It's not so much what he said, it's how he said it. And my feeling is that he was way too optimistic. You see, he's a young kid. He's just, learning things. He's hoping for change. And unfortunately, I've been around too many years to know that change never comes. Bad things continue to happen, and you'll see why, particularly because I'm dealing with precipitation, which is a far worse beast than air temperature is. I am an observationalist. I have been dealing with precipitation observations for years. I've developed weather network for the Delmarva Peninsula. I developed a weather network and helped them install it in Nigeria. I've worked on global precipitation issues for the US federal government. I've worked on global precipitation issues on Frankfurt am Main with the Deutsche Wetterdienst. I've worked on regional precipitation issues for Romania. I have originally hung out with some of the people that were instrumental in IPCC 1, 2, the U.S. National Climate Assessment 1 and 2. In fact, Tom Carl, whose name has been taken in vain earlier and for good reason, offered me a job to work with him, beside him on these kinds of issues, and I turned him down. And that sort of set me on the road of being persona non grata. But the reason is that by working with these people, I was always told that homogeneity problems, urbanization problems are all going to be fixed, and we're going to all have that all solved by the next century. See, I thought the next century was the 21st century. Apparently it's the 22nd century, or it might even be the 23rd century. I'm not sure, but we still are working on those problems, and we're now, a quarter of the way into this one. But when I started, I was involved in a land hydrology analysis. We were trying to put together a global climatology of land surface hydrology. The Soviets had done it just about 5 years earlier, but it was very subjective. It was low scale. We wanted to do it at high scale, very objective by computers and so forth. And my part was to take precipitation data and make it work for this global climatology. And so what I find out is, we have put up a lot of weather stations around the world. So we went and collected data, we assembled them, and as a result, geolocated them. And then the idea was to take observations from other locations as well, spatially interpolate them. I'm not going to talk anything about problems of spatial interpolation. That's an hour and a half, two-part lecture that I'm not giving anytime soon. But in any event, the idea is that's what we were going to do, and therefore put all of this together into assessing essentially regional scale time series, regional scale estimates of precipitation spatially, and then looking at how that changed over time. One of the problems with precipitation is it's highly variable, more so than air temperature, and also it's highly variable spatially. There's been a number of times, I'm sure, where you've been driving along, you've been in a heavy downpour, and all of a sudden the downpour stops, you look back, it's still raining behind you, but you're in an area where there's no rain. Question, did it rain on that day? The answer is, well, it depended upon where the rain gauge was located. It could either be raining if it's back here, or it's not raining if it's over here. And so we have a lot of spatial variability going on, particularly in the mountainous regions. It makes things exceedingly difficult. So the idea then is what we were trying to do, let me get rid of that thing. What we were trying to do is be able to come up with some assessment of global precipitation. And so, for example, I'll start with Deutschland. Here's Deutschland, and look at stations. And yes, Germany has lots of stations. Very good. Not so much for the rest of the planet. Lots of missing values, and as we go along in time, they change over periods, 51 to 80, as they come in, but then they disappear. You can see how India sort of dropped off in the latter part of the record. I think Dr. Connolly mentioned that as well. So we assume, first of all, the data are independent and identically distributed. Statistically, that's what we require. That's not necessarily what happens. They're not everywhere. Here was what wound up to be our global precipitation climatology. There are some countries that look good, some countries don't look so good. And it all depends on how big you make the little dot, because I can make dots really big to make it look like I'm full, and I can make dots really teeny to make it look like there's nothing that we have. But one of the issues is that data generally exists where developed people live, okay? If you're fighting for food, clothing, shelter, and security, you generally have no interest in putting in weather stations because staying alive is more important, and weather stations are simply a costly good. But once you become developed, weather is something you start to worry about. They tend to be where developed people live. So it's along coastlines, generally not as much inland. They tend to be at lower altitudes, not at the top of mountains. So valleys are much better represented than the top of mountains. They tend to be in mid-latitudes, not so much in the tropics, not so much in the high latitudes. They tend, as I said, developed countries. They tend to exist over land areas, which was okay for us because we were really only interested in a land surface climatology, but over oceans was necessary. So you've got an urban, developed land, low altitude bias associated with a data set. And unfortunately, the distributions change over time. For example, in our data set, Japan, magically, all of their stations disappeared in 1945. I was with Tom Carl. We were signing a protocol for data exchange with the Soviet Union. I think it was 1991. We are trying to get the back data so we can take this thing back into time, not knowing that 2 years later the Soviet Union would effectively collapse and most of the weather stations would cease to be functional. And so that poof, the whole network would simply disappear for a time. So things go fun. But when we look at developed countries, such as Deutschland, you get the idea there's lots of stations. And here, for example, there's approximately 2,000 precipitation gauges operated across Deutschland from Deutsche Wetterdienst. And we're going to assume that all of those use a standard Hellman rain gauge, which is fairly common in this part of the world. Now, that rain gauge has an orifice area of 200 square centimeters. So I'm going to take 2,000 gauges, multiply by 200 square centimeters. That gives me an area of 40 square meters. So next time when you're watching the World Cup final between Germany and Brazil, and it comes down to the penalty shootout. Oh, I'm not supposed to tell you that. Okay. Well, the next time you're watching a penalty shootout, let's say, realize that the total area of precipitation measured in Germany is only 40% of the 6-yard box. That's the whole sampling network of this country, which has a fairly dense network. Think about what it is in Nigeria, or think about what it is in Chad, for example. Just, it boggles the mind that we really have very few observations. We assume the data are independently and identically distributed. And so the idea is that the mean somehow is equal to the variance divided by the square root of the sample size. And so if I've got 13,000 some odd stations around the planet, then I can divide by the square root of 13,000, and that tells me how big my error bar is. But you can't do that because they're not independent. What I have to use is essentially an effective sample size, which is much less than the big sample size because some of these stations are literally measuring the same process. They're not independent. Next thing, we want to assume the data are representative. And then I ask the question, well, representative of what? Do you want these to be climatologically representative, or do you want them to be hydrologically representative? And what do I mean by the difference? Well, in other words, does it need to look like a climatological station, or does it really need to measure what's happening in the real world? Because climatologically, we're told we've got to put the station up away from obstructions. No trees, no buildings, no furnaces, no air conditioning outlets, nice, clean, open areas. But the world doesn't look like that. I mean, some places do, so we can put a station like that, but some places don't, where we have stations. And so you've got rain gauges located in all sorts of different environments. Some environments have trees right around them, some have lots of other things, and some are just plain ridiculous. But nevertheless, we want to know what's happening, and I'll give you the worst case scenario. Where would you put the rain gauges to figure out how much rain fell in Berlin? Well, you're not going to find an open area like we saw at the beginning with no trees and no obstructions, but we really want to know how much rain falls, not just in Spain, but we also want to know in Germany and in Berlin in this case. And my question again is, where do you put the rain gauges? We also want to assume that the data are consistent. That is, if I take an observation today and I come back 10 years from now and I have exactly the same situation, I want to get the same number. If it repeats, I want it to be consistent over time and space. But the problem is, we move stations around. Station's environment, the local situation around it may change. Somebody may put in trees, or then they may go and cut trees down. Buildings may be constructed. What it used to look like may not be what it looks like now. And it may not be a jump discontinuity by cutting down the trees. It may be by planting little trees that over time grow to huge oaks. Stations change instrumentation. This is going to be the most deadly of all. I'll give that to you, but I'll just skip that for right now. And we change the way we observe. Okay, this is 1962, Dulles Airport, Washington, D.C. This is Maine Washington Airport. Okay, and as you can see, those are sheep grazing in the vicinity of the airport. Same shot today. I'm not sure how the sheep are going to live in the middle of the parking lot, but you can see things have changed. The question is, where do we put the rain gauge? How do we adjust for the bias? Because here's the problem. As we saw with air temperature, we know that there's an urbanization effect, and things get warmer over time as urbanization grows. Well, the question is this going to be wetter, drier, or more variable, or just the same as we went from a field grazing sheep to a parking lot? Well, I don't know. It could be both. It could be either. How do we know? Well, one of the ideas is we said, well, with air temperature, let's go to surrounding stations. We'll take stations from nearby that are still rural and put them in. And when you've got big cities like Berlin or a big city like Houston, Texas, even the surrounding stations are associated with urbanization effects. So there's no way to do the cross comparison between what's happening here, what's happening there, and how we can fix that. Now, the big question always comes down to the idea of, are we seeing more floods and droughts? And I was state climatologist of the second smallest state in the union, Delaware, and the idea is, I was always asked, are we seeing more floods and droughts up near northern Delaware, which is much more urbanized? My answer was, yeah. Does it have anything to do with human activity? Most definitely. Is it climate change? And I'd always have two answers. One is no, and the other answer is it doesn't matter. Because if the answer is no, because I can't show you, but if I had the slide, I would show you the Palmer Drought Severity Index, and that's not changing over time, so no, it's not climate change. But at the same time, I can say it doesn't matter because the bigger signal that swamps all that is changes in land use. This is Tallyville, Delaware, 1937. It's a little teeny city, little teeny community, not even a city, with trees, farmland. I'm going to put this in motion. We're going to see it move forward for 85 years. What happens is it becomes a suburb of Wilmington, Delaware, which is about a city of 80 to 100,000 in northern Delaware. So think about it for a moment. When rain falls in Tallyville in 1937, what happened? The water went into the ground, took a while to get to the river, the Brandywine River. What happens now in 2022? There we go. It's what's called urban street flooding. The streets are very efficient at moving that water overland to the river. So we get an increased flood peak. What happens when we get into a drought? We've got more people, we've got more water-intensive activities, we've got more businesses needing water, we've got more demand for water, so the demand increases. So yeah, we see more floods and more droughts. It's not a climate question. This is a land use change question, still related to people, not necessarily even concerned with the issue of climate change. Now, here's a weather station that's located 4 miles from where I live. Okay, I know it's there because it's been there for about 60 years, and it's been recording all along. I can go, I think we're going to be in July soon, so sometime about now, I think the May data would be reported, so we'll get May air temperature and May precipitation and probably some other statistics. And I know what you're thinking right about now. I don't see any weather station anywhere near that. And the answer is neither do I. And that weather station hasn't been there for 30 years. So how can we get data? And the answer is the National Weather Service, or more correctly, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, literally makes up the data. They go to surrounding stations, they estimate it, and then they say, well, if that station had still been there, this is what we would have gotten. And then they report it as a constant value. You think this is bizarre, and it is, but most people don't know that's exactly what happens. If you start going to some of these stations, they really aren't there anymore, but they're reporting all the time. Now, I know also what you're thinking. This is precipitation. This is not rocket science, okay? How difficult is it to measure precipitation? All you need is a tin can and a ruler, and we can measure precipitation. In fact, here's a nice young girl, German girl I think she is. She's measuring precipitation. She aspires to be a meteorologist or maybe a hydrologist. She's taken a 2-liter bottle, cut the top off, calibrated it, and now she has a rain gauge. And I can tell you, most of the rain gauges in use today aren't much different than this one. Yeah, we do some fun things like we weigh them instead of using a dipstick. These are the Belfort and the Fisher-Porter gauge. We have GNOR that makes a wire string gauge. Essentially, you electronically plucks the wire, and the frequency by which it vibrates can be related to how much moisture there is. We have an optical rain gauge, which literally watches the rain as it falls between the sensor and the target and counts the droplets and their size and can estimate how much rain is falling. We have a hot plate precipitation gauge, which evaporates or sublimates the snow or rain that falls, and we know how much energy it took for the one plate to get rid of it. The other plate doesn't have any on it, so that excess energy must be how much moisture there was through the latent heat of vaporization. We have acoustic rain gauges, which we can see precipitation falling on the top of the sensor creates a noise, and we can relate the noise to precipitation quantity, type, and intensity. Don't worry about all those. Virtually every rain gauge used globally is a tin can with some form of dipstick measuring how deep the water is. And I'm going to show you a bunch of slides from a friend of mine. I'm not sure where he is today, but he used to be at Zurich EDH, his Bork Severik. He did a lot of study, and he sat down and diagrammed a lot of these gauges for the various countries of the world. And I'll show you some. Some are on sticks, as you can see. Some are going to be stuck in the ground. Some are going to have all sorts of weird things around them. But as you look, they're generally some form of tin can, okay, with different ways to measure it. And I'll talk more about the Tretyakov gauge in a minute. You can see there's all sorts of weird designs. As I said, every country of the world uses a different gauge. And you know where I'm going with this. They all have different catch characteristics. And it's going to be related to two things. It's going to be related to the design of the gauge, but also to how high above ground you put the orifice of the gauge. There's one I want to point out. There's the Malaysian gauge. You can see, I'm not sure what that hook is in there. Sort of bizarre. Romanian gauge has one with a cap on it. I don't think it catches much rain. I'm not sure why they have it. But this is my favorite gauge. It's the Dutch gauge, the SPGN, because when it's not raining, it doubles as a pitcher of beer. So at least the Dutch know what they're talking about and can get use out of their rain gauge when it's not raining. But most people think the worst problem with a rain gauge is birds, because we've designed all sorts of bizarre things that look like medieval torture devices to try to keep birds from landing on the gauge, because I'll let you use your imagination as to what they tend to do inside the gauge. But that's not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is the effect of wind. You see, rain and snow are probably the only two meteorological variables that we're actually trying to catch mass. Everything else we're trying to measure its an effect on something, or electronically we can determine how it changes certain electronics. This you have to catch mass. And so the gauge itself becomes an obstruction to the wind flow. So across the orifice of the gauge, you have an increase in the wind speed, which decreases the catch. We have slight updrafts as the air comes over the gauge. That causes a decrease. And now we have a pressure difference between the air at rest in the gauge and the air in motion above the gauge. And that also decreases the catch. And when we look at the temperature, the catch, it's significant for rainfall, and it can be ridiculous for snowfall. There's cases where it's heavy snowfall and wind, you're catching less than 25% of the actual amount of snow that fell. Well, one way of fixing this problem is put these in the ground, which are literally called pit gauges, because they're put in a pit. I think this is Koblenz. By the way, the idea is that essentially you're trying to get the rain gauge out of the effect of the wind. The problem is nobody likes these, because imagine trying to service these, or to try to get in there with a dipstick. You have to almost stand on your head. So they're good for evaluational purposes, test time type of things, not good operationally. So what people have come up with is the idea of putting a shield. So some of those gauges before, you saw there was a shield that looked like that. And what it attempts to do is to split the effect of the wind, keep the effect below, and then keep the wind constant across the top. It's not perfect, but it does better with both rain and snow. And so if you've got a shield, that's better. Here is a knife or windshield in the real world. We have two other types of shield. There's the Soviet Tretyakov shield, which are fixed slats. And the United States has an ultra shield, which is moving slats. They attempt to do the same thing, is to separate the flow above the orifice from the flow below the orifice. Here is a Tretyakov gauge in the wild, and an ultra windshield as well. Second problem, and you probably can even see this on some of your glasses, maybe not today because there's a lot of evaporation taking place, but there's a wetting loss on the gauge. This is water that got inside the gauge. It should have been counted, but it adheres to the walls of the gauge. And so that decreases the amount of precipitation that we should be measuring as well. Third problem is evaporation, because if you look closely at an evaporation pan, it's really an upside down rain gauge. That is, it's looking at how much water is lost, not how much water is caught, but the rain gauge does the same thing when it stops raining. So if it takes you a while to get to the rain gauge to measure what's in it, you're going to lose precipitation from evaporation. And one of the things we found from the global precipitation analysis that I did for my dissertation is that globally, precipitation is an underestimate of about 8% due to wind, wetting is about 2%, evaporation is about 1%. So in total, globally, we're only measuring about 89% of the precipitation that falls. Now, it would be nice if this error were unbiased. Sometimes you're high, sometimes you're low. On average, you get the right number. You're almost always low, because there's really no process that gets you more rainfall than you should. And so as a result, it's always an underbias. And this has posed a problem for analysis over long time periods, because people doing analysis for hydrologic work that don't adjust for this loss have to do one of two things. If your input is an underestimate, then one of your outputs has to be an underestimate. It usually shows up in your estimate of evapotranspiration. And if you read the literature, a lot of people complain that how much moisture is evaporating from the ground is always less than what it really should be. And that's because if you put the rainfall being too low, somebody's got to pay for it. It's usually evaporation. Sometimes it's soil moisture gets affected. USCS curve numbers, for example, get affected that way. The idea then is that these gauges are a function of how much wind is associated with them. It's the aerodynamic of the particular gauge, whether or not it contains a shield, and the higher above ground, the higher the wind speed, because the logarithmic wind profile says the higher you go up into the air, the faster the wind is likely to be. So the idea is in rainfall, in snowfall events, what you would have is the countries generally, if they get lots of snowfall, want to put the gauge higher above ground to keep it away from the snow. But then higher above ground is higher wind, snow is of higher loss, so you have a distinct disadvantage between some countries that are tuning for snow and countries that aren't. And one of the weird things that people have always noticed is that across a lot of state boundaries, there is a discontinuity in precipitation. I mean, Barry Goodison in Canada always had these maps that showed differences between Canadian precipitation, US, and there was always a disconnect across the US border. Border had nothing to do with precipitation, had everything to do with the way the Canadians measure precipitation and the way we did. Now, why does this matter for climate? Because I'm going to say people forget all this. My dissertation has, the publication of it's been cited almost 5,000 times. I wish it would be cited 1/10 of that amount if people understood what went into it and why precipitation is so problematic to measure. And it comes about from articles like this. This is from the Times. It says, extreme rain and flooding will rise due to climate change. Well, of course it will. And they've got a study that proves it. And so what they were showing is a curve sort of like this. This is extreme one-day precipitation events in the United States from NOAA's Climate Extreme Network or Index. And since it's a NOAA network, it must be approved by the federal government. It must be good because it's the US network, and nobody's going to criticize that, of course. And you can see the data rise. So I got the updated version. You can see here it runs from 1910 until 2025. Because it's complete through last year, and you can see it rising. And how many people understand that as that number gets bigger, I'll put another curve through it, that we're getting more of our precipitation associated with heavier rainfall events, and therefore rainfall is becoming more intense in the United States. That's okay. If you think that if that's what you see in the data. Now, I can tell you, I don't see that because I know what's going on. And I'm going to show you what I see, and once I show you this, you'll never be able to unsee it again. But this is why that curve is highly misleading. So what we have is an expected value of 10%, because it says up there the population in the highest 10th percentile. Well, what happened? Well, in the late 1980s, the National Weather Service came up with the idea, I'm losing my headset, but that's all right. As long as you can hear me, it's fine. Came up with the idea that, look, what we've been doing all these years is we hire somebody to go out every hour, not the same guy, but somebody goes out every hour with a dipstick, walks up to the rain gauge, opens it up, and the rain gauge is about this high so they don't have to bend over, sticks the dipstick in, measures how much precipitation there is, dumps the funnel, put it all back together, and go back in and do this an hour from now. Said, this is old style technology. We can make it better. We can come up with a rain gauge that doesn't require human intervention because they now exist. So the National Weather Service says, let's replace these with what we call ASOS gauges. And ASOS is an acronym that stands for Automatic Surface Observing System. And you can see instead of having the standard rain gauge that you have to use a dipstick with, it has what's called a tipping bucket system. And the idea is you got two little buckets, and each bucket holds about 1/100th of an inch of rainfall. So you put one under the funnel, and when it fills, it tips. The other one pops under the funnel, and when it fills, it tips back. And so these keep tipping like this with every 100th of an inch, and all you do is have an electronic recorder that says every time it tips, We make a date. Well, now I don't have to wait till the end of the hour to find out when it's raining. I know exactly when it rains, and I know what the intensity is because I know how many tips occurred at any given time. This is a good thing. So we've gone to a case where we don't have people doing it by hand and making mistakes. It's coming in electronically. And so here are the new rain gauges, which they started to put in 1990, completed by 1993. You'll notice because people don't have to have access to them anymore, they don't have to be this high, they can be down around knee level. Well, remember, wind increases with height. So up here, you're going to have a lower catch. Down here with the same gauge, you're going to get a better catch because the wind is lower. So that gauge is going to be a little more efficient at catching precipitation. The next step is they put a Tretyakov-like shield on it. And I don't know why they chose a Tretyakov shield, because in '93 the Soviet Union was folding, and why would we use an altar shield? But that's another question for National Weather Service official. Nevertheless, they've got a shield around it. And remember, shields decrease the loss and make it much more efficient. So now we've got a gauge coming in 1993 that's going to be much more efficient than the gauges we were using prior to 1990. So what we want to do is we want to go back to the extreme one-day precipitation event. There I'll remove all the curves from it. Again, you can sort of see how that worked its way upwards and how people would argue, yeah, that's increasing over time. I have no problem with that. Except, let me plot the data through 1990. Well, that winds up to be as flat as a pancake. Okay, there is no variability. There is no trend at all. I mean, I couldn't take a random number generator probably and get a correlation lower than that. But in any event, you can see from 1910 to 1990, there is no variation. And then if we plot from 1993 to the current value, the post-modernization, it's also flat. But the difference is there's a jump discontinuity in between. Climate tends not to work in jump discontinuities. There are possible exceptions, but generally that means there's something wrong, something happened with the observational network, and I know what happened with the observational network because I knew going into this about 1990 to 93, we were transitioning over from one network to the other. I can also do this regionally, and it turns out the Northeast, it shows a much bigger trend than the Southwest, and when you start to read the fine print, you find in the Southwest, they added a lot of co-op gauges, which never went through this change, so that waters it all down. In the Northeast, there's a lot more airports that went through the ASOS change, and that's why the change is much bigger. But this is not a climate signal. This is a gauge change signal. But it's still in the record. It's never been removed by NOAA, and NOAA is still using it to demonstrate this is why precipitation is becoming more intense. I have tried to publish this on 2 different occasions. Reviewers come back. The first said, yeah, well, everybody knows that precipitation should be increasing with climate change. Since you don't prove that, you must be wrong, so do not publish the article. And the second one was, he's affiliated with groups like Heartland and CFACT, and you know who they are, so don't publish it either. So I'm going to keep trying, but nevertheless, it doesn't go over well with NOAA circles. So let me recap. Biases in precipitation gauge measurement. There's the problem that the wind loss undercatch. Wind is the worst problem associated with rain gauges. Keep them as close to the ground as you can, but don't put them under the snowpack. You can see wetting losses are small as well, meaning small events get missed because you can have a little bit of rain that wets the rain gauge but never goes into the tipping bucket or whatever and never gets recorded. Evaporation is a problem in hot, dry climates. So if you were in, let's say, Tucson, Arizona, or something in the southeast United States, when we're taking the observations once an hour, there's a potential for evaporation to take place. The problem with putting them real close to the ground is you can get splash in. Water hits the ground, splashes in, and some gauges simply have bad design, such that splash out can be a problem, particularly when the rainfall gets heavy and the rain droplets get big. The tipping bucket gauges do have problems. In very high intensity rainfall events, they just can't tip fast enough to keep going as the rain comes in, so they have a tendency to miss there. Blowing and drifting snow. Rain gauge is not able to discern snow that's falling from the sky and snow that's blowing along the ground. And so therefore that's also a problem. That would actually increase, but most of them decrease. And I can tell you blowing and drifting snow is really only a problem where you've got really cold temperatures. Conversion of snow to water equivalent, and then gauges do from time to time freeze up. Funnels get blocked by birds, even though we've got medieval type of things trying to keep them out. It doesn't always work. So when you start to see diagrams like this, and I should have mentioned earlier, think about it. When was the last time you ever saw global mean surface air temperature? A plot of global mean surface air temperature. It can't be more than 48 hours ago because I've seen it several times in this measure. When was the last time you saw global mean precipitation? Nobody plots that. Nobody. This is why it is fundamentally problematic on a global scale. And very few people even try to do it like I did, and that's why I am pessimistic. So when you start to see people talking about precipitation trends and precipitation issues and showing maps of how precipitation are changing over time, and they want to make those little teeny changes have meaning, realize they're not showing you the uncertainty, and the uncertainty often simply overwhelms everything else. And with that, I've run out of stuff to say, so I'll say thank you very much, and I'll turn it over to who the next person is. Thank you.